Rowan, in an earlier video, talked about how difficult it is for teachers to understand the statistics and therefore scrutinise Hattie's work. But there is one area I think that's relatively easy for teachers to check, and it's this area called apples versus oranges. This is a common critique of Hattie's work. Hattie's well aware of this, and he gives his only defence is this. A common criticism is that it combines apples with oranges, and such combining of many seemingly disparate studies is fraught with difficulties. It is the case, however, that in the study of fruit, nothing else is sensible. I've not been able to find any other defence of this combining of disparate studies. Now, this is relatively easy to check, something similar to what Steve did in an earlier video as well. So if we look at the studies that Hattie cites in his feedback influence, this is from his 2009 book's appendix, you can see that Steve talks about teacher praise being combined with other forms of feedback. I'd like you to focus on the Stanley study, which gives the highest effect size, and it has music. So Hattie combines all of these together, all of these numbers, and averages them to get one number. So I think that's highly questionable. If we look at this Stanley study in particular, it becomes even more questionable. For example, the Stanley study is looking at contingent music in the background, which is music that a person chooses as distinct from music that someone else chooses for them. And one of the studies is looking at the complaining behaviour in depressed people, and contingent music seems, what these numbers suggest, is that reduces the complaining behaviour. In addition, there's production line work looking at the efficiency of production line workers playing contingent music versus non-contingent music, and effect sizes are published. So one has to ask, what's that got to do with feedback in the classroom? In the case of teacher training, in Hattie's 2012 update, you can check the appendix. These are the studies that he refers to. If you have a quick look at what they're measuring, most seem to be measuring certification in the American context. So given this Pearson paper is given to Australian audience, one has to ask, what's USA certification got to do with Australian, as they're quite different. If we have a look in detail, a little bit detail of the Hack PhD, looking at NBC versus non-NBC certification, we can see more problems. The National Board of Certified Teachers is the largest certification in America. To start certification, you need at least a teaching degree plus 3 years teaching experience before you even apply. You then submit your 4 components to a panel, and that panel decides your certification. The Hack PhD is looking at whether this is worth or not, because there's a large expense per teacher, and there's quite a bit of extra hours of work in putting all this presentation together. Hack concludes that the low effect size using standardized achievement tests is not high enough to warrant that certification is worth it. The Sparks PhD, which Hattie references, is looking at different certification, and she says the disparate definitions of certification do not permit effect size estimates to be combined, yet Hattie goes ahead and does that anyway. Plus there are other major problems. It's been difficult to get the studies that Hattie's used since 2012, and his commercial partner Corn has come under some criticism for that, and just in the last month or so it's been possible to get details of those studies. And this now reveals more problems. First of all, the type of article that Hattie uses. Often they're unpublished PhD theses or conference papers which are not peer-reviewed, and most organisations don't consider them to be high-quality evidence. Many scholars have asked Hattie to remove these non-peer-reviewed papers from his work. Hattie's, of course, ignored all of that. Gregg Ashman, a popular writer, details this problem. He calls it a chimera with the Education Endowment Foundation's top strategy metacognition. He shows that the studies are disparate, much like the feedback studies I've just shown, and he concludes that this appears to be a chimera, a monster stitched together from quite disparate things. Many scholars, Dylan William, one of them, are saying this notion of combining disparate studies together to one effect size is totally meaningless, and I agree.